I started the registering, which was not on for the moment. Andreas, you accept that we record the webinar?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So our association organizes a webinar, either in presence when there is no epidemic, or through Zoom when it is necessary. And we indeed have, for the moment, we have currently two main lines of activities. One is dedicated to the study of on the study of molten salt fast reactors. We have in Grenoble a scientific community which is very rich and diverse on the energy issues. And among in this community, there are a set of high-level scientists who are studying this aspect of molten salt nuclear reactors. If you want, we may provide you with Nicolas. Nicolas may give more details if you are interested in. And the second main line of activity for us is trying to assess the strategies for reaching something like carbon neutrality from a city perspective, or from a metropolitan territory perspective. We are in close contact with the Metropolitan Authority in Grenoble, and we are studying what would it mean to have a carbon neutral, compatible, I would say, city for Grenoble. This, for different reasons, this activity is a little bit on the standard for the moment, but I do not doubt that we will start over and have a series of work on this line of activity. Okay, so this is for the introduction. As indicated, I open for newcomers. So this is for an introduction. As indicated, Andreas, we may develop our exchanges along four main issues. The first one would be a short introduction to the Energiewende in Germany. What have been very short history of the Energiewende in Germany. The second point might be dedicated to the Expertenkommission, which that you are heading, and maybe you can give us an update on your works and on maybe your main findings in this commission. Third point on the challenges and the success, challenges and difficulties in the energy transition in Germany, which might be the point of main interest for us, so as maybe the fourth and last point dedicated to the vision of a fully decarbonized electricity system for Germany in the long term, which is a very ambitious target, and you may give us your view on the different scenarios and visions that would allow for this full decarbonization or almost full decarbonization of the electricity system in Germany. I propose that, Andreas, we take these 4 points, maybe the two first one more rapidly than the two last one, and maybe at the end of each point, we have a point of exchange if there are questions, and we may have discussions after each of these 4 points. Is it okay for you? Micro.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, fine.
So
we hear you.
So now I think I can share my screen. You have to allow me to share.
I do not find again. Yes. Can you share it or not?
No, it says you deactivated the sharing.
I cut it and I. Up. Does it work like this now?
Now it's working.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so now you see my slides, no?
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's okay. Maybe as a slideshow.
Yes, a slideshow. I do that like this.
Yes, that's it.
I have all your questions below, Patrick.
Okay. Wonderful.
I should remember them. Okay. Okay. So now you see my slides, no?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Okay. So thanks for the introduction. I have to say that indeed, Patrick, I think we know each other since the end of the 1990s or so, and I learned dramatically a lot, from your different research work at that time. I should say one of my first papers actually used some data that you calculated for me, and so therefore I'm very much indebted for that because we were constructing marginal abatement cost curves. That was now 20 years ago, I think, at that time. I'm very happy that we have this possibility to talk today. Although I should say, if we are talking about the German energy transition, Joachim Schleich, who's as well here, is at least as knowledgeable as I am. So he might probably correct me, if I'm getting off a bit. Okay, so what I would like to do today is, following the points Patrick gave me, talk a little bit about the Energiewende, the idea behind the, and as well what we are doing in terms of monitoring the energy transition. And then I would like to talk mostly about the challenges and difficulties, as well taking into account the most recent political activities in Germany, which is the coal phase-out, carbon pricing that we introduced in the non-emissions trading sectors, as well as the discussion. And then I'm going to talk a bit about 100% decarbonization, but we are currently in the process of rerunning scenarios. I'm not going to show you numbers probably, but I hope I can show you some numbers for 2030 and then some ideas now about how this can be done in the long run, including the role of H2 or hydrogen. And I'm going to relate to mainly to two documents, and later on you can find in the slide set, which I would as well send you, the link to these documents. The first one is our latest publication. We do a yearly publication on the status of the German energy transition. The latest one was a comment published mid of the year, and I'm going to relate on this comment, as well as there was a document by the German academies, which I as well co-authored on Energy Transition 2030 and Europe's path to carbon neutrality. So these are two documents I'm going to use. So you said very briefly a discussion or a history of the Energiewende. Well, the German Energiewende has a relatively long history. Well, it started actually as a anti-nuclear movement. The last century, very early on, with large resistance against nuclear power, and later on support for renewables. The German feed-in tariff law, the renewable support law, was just celebrated 20th anniversary in Germany in 2000. The idea of the Energiewende then developed from there, got broader, so it's no longer only about electricity, not only about the electricity sector, renewable electricity or the electricity sector, but it became more encompassing in the 2000s and leading to an energy concept in Germany that was actually implemented in the year 2010. Originally, the energy concept had in mind an extension of nuclear power in Germany, but that was then later changed and led to the decision to phase out nuclear power by 2022. And it set up a broader set of targets for this German energy transition up to 2020. For carbon emission reduction or greenhouse gas emission reduction, as well targets for 2030 and in the longer run. But it laid out relatively concrete targets until 2020 for efficiency, for renewables in the different sectors. I'm going to show you this in a second. It as well, the energy concept, as I said, was adjusted over time, as we will see later on, and it is accompanied by a process, a monitoring process that tries to track the achievements in reaching the targets of the energy transformation. That is governed by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs, and said the next report is published on the 4th of December, hopefully. So we report once a year on the status. Here you can see the commission. That's a scientific commission that comprises 4 colleagues in here. Secretary of State, and here you see the German minister. Actually, I have to say this is a picture from 2011. He was then environmental minister, Peter Altmaier. So I thought this fits still 10 years later. So you can read these documents. No, I think that's interesting. So there's always a document from the government, and there's a comment from the commission. So we are appointed for 4 years, and we have the role to look at these different targets of the energy transition in Germany from an independent academic perspective, with a yearly report that's looking. It's not so interesting because Patrick already asked about scenarios. So we also do scenarios, but that's not done every year, but on a 3-year basis. Well, we do that, as I said, from time to time. Last time it was done in 2019. So the German the German energy transition has a set of different targets, well, in total about 50 different targets, and we try to ease a bit the communication and developed here some type of traffic light system for the Energiewende. And oops, in this traffic light system, no, I think I have to go back. This traffic light system shows the whether we are on track to reaching the different targets. And in the report, you will find, let's say, a broader set of statistics underlying these expert judgment. If you think about the targets that we have, we try to develop some type of hierarchy, and the overarching targets being the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the other targets then addressing specific sectors of the energy transition concerning the increase in renewables and energy efficiency, and specific to the German case, the phase out of nuclear power. Okay, so these traffic light system is from last year, and as I said, we are going to publish new report in 4 weeks. So, of course, concerning 2020, so which is end of the year, we have now a picture. We still don't have full data because the data is going to be 2019 data now on reaching 2020 targets, but we are sure that reaching short-term mitigation targets that were set out in our energy transition goals, 40% by 2020, they are going to be met. Here you can see still last year without COVID and without these sharp decrease in emissions, we were a little bit more skeptical about achieving that. I should as well say that emissions in Germany dropped already considerably in 2018 and 2019. I'm going to show you the reasons in a second. We are as well on path concerning phase out of nuclear power. A large fraction of nuclear power plants has been phased out in the last years, and we have only a small number of plants that are still remaining, and they are going to be phased out in 2021 and 2022. Okay, and then we have these targets for renewables. Where we want to achieve increases in renewable electricity renewable electricity in the power sector, in the heat sector, in transport sector, and quite mixed. We are very successful in renewables in cross electricity consumption. Germany, for example, in the first half of 2020 was or had a share of renewables of over 50% in electricity. So these numbers increased steadily. Of course, here as well now, because electricity demand dropped in the last month, but nevertheless, we have a continuous build-up of renewable capacity. That is not the case if you look at the heat sector, and for sure it's not the case in the transport sector, where actually the share of renewable energy in transport has been flat or even decreasing in recent years, given the sharp increase in mobility in transport services in the last years. Another part of the energy transition are energy efficiency targets. So we have targets on primary energy consumption, on final energy productivity, 2% per year, and targets for heat and for the transport sector. And there, actually, we see that most of these efficiency targets are not met in Germany. We have discussions about, let's say, soft factors like security of supply, affordability, public acceptance, and there we are not so much concerned in all three dimensions. So, for example, if you think about security of supply, we have just publication of SAIDI index for Germany, so system average interruption duration index. This year, number was actually the best we had in history, so 12 minutes interruptions in Germany. So system is running relatively stable, but of course that's only the momentary glance on the system. It's also important to look to the future, and there we are as well analyzing other indicators, we look as well on, for example, expansions of transmission grid, on capacity build out in Germany, and we see that there is indeed there are problems, for example, with a transmission grid extension, which is relatively slow in Germany. You will later see that we as well have problems with secured capacity, as we are moving out not only of nuclear but as well out of coal, and therefore this will become an issue of debate, but all studies that we have at the moment indicate that security of supply is not going to be a problem for the next 4, 5, 6 years to come. We are as well discussing affordability issues. That's also something I'm going to talk about later, because I'm an economist from training, so we are interested as well in the cost of this transition. And it's a specific topic because in Germany, as you know, electricity prices are very high. Okay, and so people are complaining about high electricity prices, and they are very sensitive to this topic. So we look at also this affordability of the energy transition. But we use different indicators. So, for example, we look at end user spending on electricity, and that means we are not looking only at prices, but at costs of electricity for households, taking into account, for example, efficiency improvements and reductions in electricity consumption. We as well relate that to GDP now, because that's in the end deciding on affordability. So what's available in total from an economic, what's total income, what's GDP in total, and we see that these end user spendings are practically flat. They're even decreasing in Germany. So at the moment we spend around 2% of our GDP on electricity, a bit more, 2.1%, but the trend is actually falling now, despite the increases in electricity prices. So GDP is just increasing more now, and efficiency is improving. And so therefore we as well don't see a real problem there at the moment. And we as well are still okay with public acceptance. So we are using different types of social surveys that we then discuss in our report, and we see that there is a large support of the energy transition in general, which is good, no? But we see that there is as well growing there's growing dissatisfaction with the implementation of the energy transition. Getting less and less convinced now that the government is actually handling it right. And people are as well not really willing to incur personal sacrifices for the energy transition. We see that if we talk about wind onshore, which is a big topic in Germany, I will show you later that this is really crucial for the energy transition, the build-up of renewable electricity. We have a target for renewables of 65%. By 2030. As I said, the share is now 50%, but we expect the electricity consumption to increase considerably over the next 10 years. And we have a lot of old electricity generation units that are going to leave the market. So this is going to be another problem. Okay, so acceptance not forgiven, especially if we are moving into more aggressive emission reduction schedules. And I'm going to talk briefly about the discussion we had in Germany on the introduction of a CO2 tax or an emissions trading system, where this problem of acceptability of cost increases to households has been showing up quite tremendously. Okay, so this is the report. So here my colleagues involved, Veronika Grimm, who's as well part of the council experts to the government, Barbara Lenz, who's a mobility researcher at DLR, German Aerospace Center, and Fridtjof Steiß from ZSW, an Institute on Solar and Hydrogen in Stuttgart. We try to formulate in our latest statement some areas where we think the German energy transition, or better, the European energy transition, really have to focus. And this was mid of the year, partly inspired, of course, by the Corona crisis. So we talked, for example, about the problem of enhancing European value added and ensuring international integration, which relates as well to issues like global value chains, for example, for example, more aggressive carbon prices. We also urged the government to address the problem of CO2 based energy price reform. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about that later on, and design these energy price reform appropriately. We talked about the efficient phase out of coal, and probably the quick phase out of coal, given market forces and the need to expand renewable energies more quickly. Probably not only in Germany, because of these resistance we are facing in many areas, but in a European context, where we have more potentials for renewable build out, at least in the longer run, moving to 100% electricity system run on renewables. Scenarios would come around 2040, probably even earlier. But for some areas, it's not going to be renewable. So we talk as well about the role of hydrogen and synthetic energy carriers, about industrial transformation and climate neutral production in Germany, which is, of course, very important with the large manufacturing core that we have in Germany, and the role then as well of infrastructures. Okay, so the other things I'm going to skip for now, and I would like to enter now the discussion that we had on what happened recently in Germany, and that is not so recent. So it's from last year, but it feels decades ago somehow. So this is the climate action plan the German government put up in 2019, and that was hailed now as a major step forward in achieving these long-term climate goals under the Paris Agreement. And what the Climate Action Plan 2050 foresees is a reduction of greenhouse gas emission by 55% until 2030. And the government, so I'm talking now from 2019, envisaged a long-term target of about 80 to 95% emission reduction by 2050. Okay, so that was the Climate Action Plan 2050, which went into law in 2019 with the climate package. It as well included the phase out of coal by 2038 at latest, and the 65% share of renewables in the power sector. It as well included an increase in the build out of offshore wind, for example, from 50 to 20 gigawatt, which was with the newest reform of the feed-in tariff system, again increased prospectively, and it as well included some cancellation on PV limits. In Germany, there was historically a limit set on the subsidized build out of PV by to 52 gigawatt. That was removed. This was an artifact that was in policies for a long time that was removed. And now it's as well more or less common sense that we need an accelerated build out not only of all renewables, but as well probably PV is going to be more important, large scale PV PV than we thought before, as well as offshore wind, given the problems that we are facing in onshore wind developments. Okay, onshore wind was not very satisfactory. I will show you this in a second. So if you look at this climate action plan, now you see here the emissions in Germany 1990, 2018 when this was decided, and 2030, and you can see that these targets for the different sectors, they are quite substantial. So sectors like, for example, the energy sector or the building sector would even do more than the 55%, while other sectors, transport, for example, doing around 40%, industry around 50%, agriculture only 32%. But given the problems that we are facing in decarbonizing building, transport sector specifically, you can see that these targets relate to pretty heavy annual. So this means for this decadal perspective, you have to reduce emissions by 3–4% in the different sectors. And this is, as I said, the current situation with this climate package. But this is for sure going to be adjusted because now Germany has committed to climate neutrality as part of the Green Deal. And so climate neutrality is going to be more than 55% in 2030. So the EU target of 55% is going to translate in a target that is higher than 55% for Germany. And there are different studies, and of course it depends as well a bit on how this is going to be implemented in the emissions trading system, in the effort sharing regulation. So we don't know that at the moment, but we assume that we are going to be more on the side of 60%, 61% reduction in Germany. So this has to be adjusted accordingly. And as well then going to have impacts on the targets I was talking about before. So 65% target for renewables, for example, is no longer consistent with the Green Deal 2030 European target. From all that we know, it might be that we need not 65%, but 70 or even more percent in 2030. As I said, there are currently first studies out. Agora Energiewende has published a study last week, but only a short version. The long version is going to be published next week. So I'm not about these studies, but it's clear that that we have to adjust even from this plan, which is already quite ambitious for Germany. So this is the climate action plan, and of course we are as well hit, or we as well have to consider what constitutes these emission reduction target. And the first component is the phase out of coal. So the phase out of coal was a very painful process, but in the end, the phase out of coal was decided in July this year. So we have a phase out law enacted by the German government, parliament, and this was brought about by a commission, a coal exit commission that was appointed by the government in 2018 to reach a consensus oriented decision on how to phase out coal over the next 20 years. And that is, of course, ambitious because coal makes up historically a large part of electricity generation in Germany, more than a third. Germany has been the largest lignite producer in the world since the beginning of industrial lignite mining, and there are still large lignite mines in Germany, which were as well very important in the former German Democratic Republic for the industries there. And as well in western part of Germany, we have the Rhenish mining district, which are very traditional industrial complexes in Germany, in North Rhine-Westphalia. So this commission came up with a proposal how to ensure that we achieve this climate target in the energy sector I showed you before, the 61 to 62% CO2 reduction versus 1990, and set up a roadmap. And the roadmap more or less was then, the proposal was to reduce about 1/3 of coal capacity by 2022, so in the short run, another 1/3 until 2030, and the rest after 2030. That was the idea of the phase-out decision. Well, I was giving a presentation in front of the coal commission, so I just show you briefly 2 slides from there. I was already, when I talked to the commission in 2018, convinced that we are going to achieve a relatively large share of coal phase out by market forces with increasing carbon prices. So what you can see here, these are business as usual projections for 2030 that were drawn in 2018 for this coal commission. That was the status quo of lignite and hard coal generations in terawatt hour. And you can see that many of these scenarios have actually assumed that half of the electricity production from coal disappears in the next 10 years, and as well a substantial share of the installed capacity is driven out of the market simply because these plants are relatively old, and carbon pricing is picking up and driving them out of the market, in combination of course with the extension of renewables. Okay, and this that we presented there in 2018, of course, is now going to be as well outdated, because on the one hand, we see that the Green Deal is going to result in much higher carbon prices. If you look at this study I was talking about from Agora Energiewende, they now talk about more 50 to 60 euro per ton of carbon under the target, the new target in the European emissions trading system, which will then be probably 65% reduction, for example, if this is done linearly. With the increase in the European target. And that would mean that most of the coal power plants are going to leave the market. That will most likely happen already until 2030. So many of the new studies, they actually assume that in 2030, we will not have a lot of coal power left. Most of the coal power is gone. Okay, of course, Patrick was asking what happens then. Okay, and again, I show you one slide on the energy security debate that we had with the coal phase out. Okay, where we were, of course, discussing what happens then to the German export or import balance in electricity. Germany is now a net exporter of electricity, a large exporter, and with the coal phase out, this is going to disappear more or less. Later, well, I can tell you about it, but for our new report, we are going to do a little assessment what that could mean. It could mean that we are actually going to be an importer of electricity by 2030 in order to assure supply security. But there are, of course, other possibilities as well to deal with this problem. We could as well run, for example, more gas-fired power plants. No, and this is a strategy that you can see in these discussions from the Coal Phase-Out Commission. These scenarios, you can see that in order to have the necessary guaranteed capacity, you're using a lot of renewables, but you will as well need a relatively large fraction of gas-powered power plants. This was then the discussion in order to address what we call the Dunkelflaute, the dark lull, where you have then problems of adequate renewable generation for longer periods of time. Let's say 14 days, for example, you're using then more of these gas power plants to guarantee, which means that you're replacing this coal and nuclear energy by renewables, by gas, and potentially by imports. Okay, the question is, how fast can you be with renewables? How fast can you be, or how much can you extend imports, or do you want to extend imports? To what extent is that tolerable, given that not only our coal plants are going to be phased out much more quickly than we thought, but as well power plants, for example, in Poland and in other places are phasing out faster than we thought. Are we exposing us there to substantial risk, and how do we want to deal with it? Okay, so this is the one big development in the German Energiewende. The other big development is that we implemented carbon prices. Historically, Germany had carbon prices in the emissions trading sectors, but we had no carbon prices in transport and heating. Of course, we had energy taxes, but energy taxes were not systematically based on carbon emissions, and they were relatively low, especially in the heating sector. For example, CO2 prices on oil in Germany in heating were about €6 per ton of carbon. And so one of the main changes in Germany was that in order to achieve these CO2 emission reduction requirements that I showed you from the Climate Law 2030, which is aligned with the effort sharing regulation target for the non-ETS sectors in Germany, was that we started to use energy taxes to achieve our targets. And this has been implemented given, as I said, this situation where CO2 prices were relatively low in heating. Well, if you we have here, of course, mineral oil taxes that are quite high, but they are, of course, as well addressing other purposes, especially they're used for generate budget, and they are not in this respect counting as CO2 prices. And the idea was here to really increase carbon prices for the sectors outside the ETS. Electricity, where the production only saw the ETS prices. These were historically low prices. Now ETS prices increased. That already changed a lot the composition of the power fleet in Germany. A lot of coal plants, or the coal plants were most hit in the first half of this year because of high CO2 prices and low demand in Germany. So they hit all big losses in the German system, but as well for gas and for heating oil. we wanted to change that, and we wanted to implement a carbon price that was, or that is able to achieve our CO2 mitigation target for these sectors. And then, of course, you have to think about how much is the demand for emissions in these different sectors going to react on price increases in order to achieve this target. And this is a graph from the impact assessment that was done before the implementation of the CO2 price, where they try to assess a range of potential carbon prices to reduce emissions to a level that is compatible with the climate law and the effort share regulation. And you can see that depending on how elastic the demand for emissions in these sectors is, the higher, the lower the demand, the higher the prices have to be, in order to make these changes. So the suggestions by the researchers were it's somewhere between 70 euro and 350 euro. Most likely it's something like 130 euro in order to achieve the required targets, the emission reductions in transport, in heating, and in the household sectors. And based on these feedback, well, the government implemented a price scheme that I show you here. So on the 1st of January, we are starting with a CO2 price of 25 euro. It's going to increase to 55 euro. And then, and that's a speciality in Germany, then this is going to move to an emissions trading system in the sector that is kept according to these effort sharing target for Germany for the non-ETS sectors. So at the beginning, this is a fixed price emissions trading. Later on, they want to let it trade. At the moment, the margins for trading in the law are relatively narrow, so 65 to 55 euro. So most likely it's going to hit the 65, given what I just told you, if it's really so costly to reduce emissions in the sector, then the National Emissions Trading Scheme will hit the ceiling price of 65% relatively early. And then, of course, it's going to be a political decision of how to deal with it. It's as well going to be an important decision how to adjust these this national emissions trading scheme in the non-ETS sectors to the European Green Deal, because now effort sharing regulation has changed. It's going to change. We don't know how this is going to happen. Actually, the German Minister or State Secretary of the Environment said, oh, we don't have to change anything because we are already compatible with this. Probably that's not the case. So we have to adjust as well our targets in the effort sharing regulation. So effort sharing regulation will be touched somehow. It will be either scaled with a new EU target, or there will be some negotiation on how to redistribute the burden for the different member states. Okay, and as I said, this is at the moment not clear. So if you look at scenario analysis, you will see that they make some assumptions how much of the reduction in Europe is going to come from the ETS, how much reduction is going to come from the non-ETS. And you can do that from an economic perspective, trying to balance abatement costs in the different sectors, which would probably shift again a lot of burden to the ETS, but it's going to be expensive there as well. So in the Agora study, you can see that they share the additional emission reduction for Germany 50-50 to the emissions trading system and to the non-ETS sector, but you can as well have different ways to handle this. And of course, there's an assumption of how this burden is shared between member states. So are we just adding or are we just scaling all the member state targets under the effort sharing regulation? Or is there some type of renegotiation, knowing that, for example, Eastern European countries have been given quite a lot of credits under the effort sharing regulation? Is that going to be touched again, probably with some type of compensatory scheme, which would make sense, of course, from an economic perspective, no? Or are we going to see a system where this effort sharing regulation with target by member states is more or less abundant, and we are moving into an emissions trading system in the European non-ETS sectors, which would, of course, again, make national targets reluctant in terms of hard targets. They would then be only aspirational targets for the time being. And if you look at the impact assessment of the Commission that was published last month, you would see these different options spelled out. And I'm as well in a working group with the European academies where Pantelis Kapros, Patrick, you know him very well, is as well part. They have done the impact assessment with these different possible governance structures. No, but the problem, of course, is now that all the national schemes have to be implemented into this European approach, and the German national emissions trading scheme will be an additional obstacle. Okay, so therefore, actually, I propose this scheme starting with a price, a carbon tax, and then move to an emissions trading system, because the Conservative Party was not willing to accept a carbon tax. So we framed this fixed price emission trading system in order to convince them that you can move into an emissions trading system in the future and start with something that helps you regulate these sectors early on. But they are very eager to implement it. Actually, the emissions trading system is already well in shape, so it's going to start relatively soon. And that is something I asked them not to do, because then, of course, you're doing a lot of detailed regulation on exemptions, for example, that's currently in the German parliament. Who is going to be exempted, what happens with carbon leakage and all these type of things. So once you implement this, of course, in a national emissions trading system, you are taking away a lot of flexibility for actually tackling the problem on a European level. Okay, but that is the situation. Okay, so that's important for these sectors, but in order to achieve these higher targets in the long run, I think you need more than carbon pricing, and that is well understood by the German government. Therefore, I will show you this in a second. Germany has actually implemented a rescue and recovery package that has actually three main pillars from an environmental point of view. The first is they restrict the increase in the feed-in tariff. Okay, well, that is what I said before. You want to allow cheap renewable electricity to be used in sectors that are difficult to decarbonize otherwise. Okay, so electrification is important in heat. So I show you here heat pumps is one option. There are as well people talking about fuel cells in the sector, or as well high temperature process heat then directly with hydrogen or via electrolysis. And of course you have as well this mobility sector where we see a large hope for battery electric cars. Okay, electrification being a large part of the decarbonization story. But that is not enough. So beside electrification, and cheap renewable electricity. So that was the electricity price reform and the cap of the feed-in tariffs. You need as well to bring in hydrogen and synthetic energy carriers. So Germany set up one of the biggest hydrogen initiatives in the world. I'm going to show you as well in a second as part of this recovery package. And the idea is to address here especially industry needs with hydrogen in refineries, in steel production, in fertilizers, as well to some part in the mobility sector. If you think about planes, so air travel, as well as trains in Germany. This is an important part of the decarbonization story. Another important part I would like to mention is as well linked to industry, because the industrial sector in Germany has a special role, because we have still about or more than 20% of our value added from manufacturing sector. Whatever you want to achieve in terms of decarbonization, this is going to be a very important constraint you have to take into account. And again, of course, these sectors are going to be hit hard by the ETS. Because now we are going to see higher ETS prices. But the additional problem is, if you are moving into decarbonization in these sectors more quickly, and if you are increasing the ETS targets, you will not have enough certificates to compensate these sectors under the free allocation rule that we have currently in the ETS. And that's going to be a problem from 2025 onwards, because the whole way we are supporting our energy intensive sectors in the ETS is not going to work with the high targets, because you have ceilings for free allocation of certificates. So the question is, what are you doing then? And Germany and the EU, they are discussing border carbon adjustment measures, for example. They are as well discussing carbon contracts for difference under these new regulations, and we will see probably a combination of different possibilities to allow climate neutral production without losing industry in Germany. Okay, so there will be a lot of different activities for sure. Push measures that I just discussed, but as well push measures that relate to hydrogen and the support of hydrogen in these industries. So Germany has set up a lot of sandbox projects already that try to target green hydrogen and its use in different sectors, but this is going to accelerate fastly, and it's going to include as well a ramp up of, for example, electrolyzers. Germany intends to build 5 gigawatt of electrolyzers by 2030, and currently they are also discussing, for example, to exempt then renewables fully from feed-in tariffs. For example, if they go to produce green hydrogen. Okay, so this is currently in the legislative process. We as well are going to see some pull measures. I think they are very important. In this last report, we talk a lot about these pull measures, and that's related more to certification, standardization, carbon disclosure of industries. We think that in order to really explore as well the chances of long-term carbon-free production, it's crucial to have possibilities industries that can show that they have really these carbon neutral supply chains. So there's a lot of discussion in Germany now about development and implementation of transparent and practical CO2 certification schemes, which would be, of course, as well needed for any type of carbon border adjustment. It's as well needed if you really take the German, the European initiatives on green investments to the next level. You know, the taxonomy is currently trying to develop what is a green investment, but that is a very rough identification of carbon neutral production and consumption. This is going to be extended for sure, and we think that's a very important topic as well to discuss. Besides, so this was R&D support, for example, in the area of industry and H2, probably as well mobility. We as well talk about infrastructure extensions, because we need, of course, substantially more infrastructure that relates, for example, to hydrogen infrastructure. So the grid plans, the transmission plans for hydrogen have been just published 2 months ago. It as well relates to charging stations for electric vehicles, which are necessary under these different scenarios. You can see that in many of these scenarios, people expect to have 10 million electric vehicles by 2030, which would, of course, require substantial charging services. That as well relates to this H2 infrastructure. It relates to electricity infrastructure, because if we think these renewable targets in Europe cannot be met or implemented only in Germany, we are going to rely more on imports of renewables from other member states. So we need as well a strong build-up of European electricity infrastructure. So it's carbon pricing and complementary policies, infrastructure policies, technology support. And here you can see now the measures now that we have been implementing in the last month. So here the German Rescue and Economic Stimulus Package, which of course you can question in some areas. So for example, we implemented a very expensive value-added tax reduction, which is not very targeted, and I would think has not a really big effect. But we as well had green measures of 40 billion out of 350 in the rescue package. So it's still relatively small. Okay, so it's about 10% of the total package that was implemented in July. Now, of course, with a new lockdown, we are going to have new rescue packages following this lockdown. But this is going to be only for rescue. We are not going to see additional efforts, for example, on green measures in these new budget proposals after the lockdown. But here, I think that's interesting. Because you can see that a lot of money should go to an increased RES build-out. And if you look at the auction prices in Germany, you will see that wind and PV auctions clear at levels of around 4 cents for PV and around 6.5 cents for wind. So additional costs from subsidizing renewables are coming down substantially, especially for now PV. because, as I said, wind is relatively constrained, and it's not an economic topic to build out wind. It's more a topic of available space in Germany at the moment. So you need some more money for the rest build out, but we as well reserved some money for capping the future increase of the feed-in tariff, and this is going to be a big topic, or this was a big topic this year, because now we got our expectation or expected increases in the feed-in tariff. So our feed-in tariff already is about 7 cents, and given the fall in the wholesale electricity prices, and the feed-in tariff is also always making up difference between the guaranteed feed-in tariff and the electricity price on the wholesale market. Given the drop in the wholesale prices, our feed-in tariff would have escalated now to almost 9 cents. So the huge increase now, and this is going to be buffered because now we are going to cap the feed-in tariff to 6.5 cents, and as I said, we propose to even reduce it further, probably to 0, and pay the costs now of that's all old renewables that have been built now in the past, cover these costs out of the budget. Okay, that would help then to bring down electricity prices, and that would of course help then the electrification of the sector, the sectors. Here you can see the other big part of expenses that's in the mobility sector, that is to a large extent charging infrastructure and support of electrification in buses, trucks, ships, and so forth. And this is here the hydrogen package. So this is 9 billion on industry and hydrogen. So that is as well, if you compare it, really a large amount of money. I'm as well part of the Japanese Energy Transition Council, and when we tell this to Japanese colleagues, they talk a lot about hydrogen economy. They are astonished. So the European hydrogen package, the German hydrogen package, they are really big now as well compared internationally. And the idea is that we want to be in a position where we can decarbonize these sectors, the industry, and part of the transport in 2030. Okay, so this was the core of the presentation. So I have prepared more slides if you're interested in specific topics, but this was more or less, I would say, an update on what happened. Patrick, you're a close follower of the German Energiewende, but that was what happened in the last 12 months or so. Actually, a lot happened in Germany. So in the shadow of the Corona crisis, I think many things have been actually implemented, and of course we are going to get another push from the European level once we know more about how the new EU target is going to be set and what that means for the member states. So for sure this is going to change a lot what I just said today, but I just want to as well make clear that we have done quite a lot in Germany as well in the last month with substantial policy changes. Also, I would say due to the change in public perception. So people, climate change is seen as a real phenomenon in public debates nowadays in Germany. And of course, it's as well brought to the street with the Fridays for Future movement, which was really big in Germany now, and still has a lot of attention in policy making today. And the other side, the yellow vests or whatever, this was never visible in Germany. It was a big discussion when when implementing, for example, the carbon pricing, but it was all a theoretical discussion, I would say. It was never a real discussion in the German policy debate. Okay, so thanks for now.
Well, thank you very much, Andreas, for this extremely comprehensive presentation of the situation in Germany. You have been dealing both with the political, economic, and technical aspects of the problem. I hope that the considerations on the technicalities of the connecting the ETS and non-ETS sector, which is sorry, a highly technical issue. I hope that our colleagues were not lost in this part of the presentation, but of course they can now raise questions and more indications on the different aspects. I have taken some questions from the conversation panel in Zoom, but maybe it's better to start with direct question. I keep the other questions for later. So please, who wants to raise question to Andreas? Don't hesitate.
Michel. Yes. Thank you very much, Andreas Löschel, for this very informative and clean presentation. Before going to some of your points, I would like to ask you a question which is outside your presentation, which is, we have, and you will be invited, of course, we have another webinar in 10 days from now, which is called Entretien Européen, European Conversation or so, which gathers 9 countries from Europe, but also people from European Commission and so on and so forth. On the topic, the topics is about the nuclear civil contribution for the climate, nuclear. And so, in fact, related to this, and of course, you will be welcome to attend to, connected to that, I would like to ask you about the taxonomy. You know, taxonomy excluded nuclear aspects, whereas we, in our understanding, distinguish various generations of nuclear reactors, and the last part, generation 4, in which, as Patrick told at the beginning of the meeting, we have in Grenoble some speciality, some expertise about molten salts, fast reactors. And we have a feeling that generation 4 in general, and especially MSFR, could be called renewable, as well as wind or solar. So my question would be, would Germany possibly help us in order to change the taxonomy and to enlarge it to renewable nuclear power?
Well, I fear you cannot count on Germany. Honestly, I think that's political now in the end, of course. And I mean, the question there is a question that is very similar, I tell you, very similar to the discussion we have on green hydrogen at the moment. Okay, so of course, I mean, you can import hydrogen. Okay, these will be perfectly important, or will be a very important possibility as well for the German energy transition. But politically, we have a strong preference for hydrogen that is coming from German renewables. Okay, and this is something now that it's political now. I mean, it's not, let's say, consistently factored in these type of debates. We had, when I talked about this hydrogen strategy, it took us about a year to come up with numbers because the German Environment Ministry was insisting that all numbers that are in the hydrogen plan are actually coming from German renewables. Okay, mm-hmm. And then we said, everybody said, this is not possible. Now we don't have that much renewable electricity to produce all the hydrogen that's needed. Now they achieved some type of agreement, where there is still a preference for domestically produced hydrogen. And I guess it's a similar debate with the green nuclear that you are just making up, because it's simply a political decision against nuclear. Okay, this is a more general political decision that is not taking into account the real carbon footprint, for example, of this activity. No, it's simply different. And I guess in Germany, of course, that's overshadowed, I should as well say that, by the discussion about the final repository for nuclear power. That is as well a process that got a lot of attention in Germany. So if you're talking about nuclear, I think in the mind of most people is now this discussion about final storage site for nuclear. We have set up a new commission on nuclear storage, and they have just published the first results. So they want to find a storage site by 2050. Okay, and they want to decide on the site by 2030. And the first, let's say, the first level publication of potential sites was published 1 month ago. And so, the problem of final storage or final deposits, which of course might be different in your generation 4 reactors. I just tell you from a political or from a public opinion, that is currently a very sensitive one, because, for example, they have excluded only a smaller part of Germany for these storage sites, and so a lot of people are well frightened that they will end up with the final nuclear storage in Germany, for example. And just today we had large protests against Castor transports, for example, in Germany. So this is just a situation where it's very difficult to get political support for this type.
Just one point, Andreas. But I will not continue more than that now, because I think we could send to you some documents. The point is that what we are looking for in Grenoble is to have nearly no waste. That's the point.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go more. Thank you.
Yeah, but I fully understand now with the generation 4. I just say that, I mean, how people are thinking about this now is at the moment overshadowed by this national debate about the final storage site. So this is in the mind of any politicians, because now, for example, they have set up whole Bavaria, more or less whole Bavaria, as a potential storage site. And the Bavarian Prime Minister said, this is not going to happen. No, we will have our own commission, and we are not going to accept that you are going to store that in Bavaria. So therefore, I just say, if you're discussing that with policymakers, I think you will have a hard time to convince them, that we are not talking about past waste, but about future waste.
Okay. Thank you very much. Patrick?
Yes, I try to put together different points that appear on the conversation and add some of my questions in that. My point it would be, and not only mine, but one point made by Nicolas also on the fact that beyond 2030. You have to ensure the safety of the system, the security of the system. And you mentioned the fact that it could become a problem. My understanding of the solution that you presented, at least for the 2030 horizon, is the fact that probably gas will be the solution for ensuring the security of supply of the electricity system. Because I've seen that in one of your diagrams, a large part of the guaranteed power was given by gas. So this means that probably Germany should invest quite a lot. Is it new gas turbines or existing ones or?
Well, it would be new ones because the existing ones would not fit well now to the characteristics of the peakers that you would need.
For the backup.
So you would basically build new backup capacities.
Okay. And so in the conversation, one question is raised on the fact, is it normal to put gas in the taxonomy? And indeed not nuclear. You understand that in France the issue of nuclear is not exactly figured out as in Germany. And well, is it normal to have gas in it and not nuclear, especially for new solutions of nuclear, such as the one that Michel mentioned?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really very hotly debated topic in Germany as well, because one of the problems with the coal phase out is that you might end up with a lot of gas capacity. No, and then of course you have a gas phase out now that you have to orchestra afterwards. No, so you're just shifting the problem, and that is a real danger, I think. But it's I mean, to keep in mind is that, of course, in Germany, you have traditionally a very large reliance on gas, no? So you have a very well built up gas infrastructure, and we are using a lot of gas in heating traditionally. So this is really important, and probably it's the demand for gas in most of the scenarios is indeed increasing. And the question, of course, is will that be then probably go to the electricity sector? Well, probably partly, or where else is it going to be needed? For example, in industry, no, because I mean, you have the question of high temperature heat, for example, or other problems that you have to solve. No, and the idea, I think, in the longer run in Germany is that you are going to substitute natural gas by green hydrogen.
Yes.
That is the perspective.
This is what appears from your scheme, and green electricity imports.
And green electricity imports.
But are you sure that you will find on the European market large quantities of green electricity that will be traded? Because beyond this problem, beyond the problem of the increasing the share of renewable, is also the question of aren't they technical potential limits to the increase of renewables?
Yeah.
And for instance, problems of acceptability of wind machines and so on. Is it identified as a potential problems for the future?
Yeah, it is identified because what we are seeing in Germany, of course, with these problems with the wind build out, we are going to see in other places as well. No, so of course we have the European potentials. So in principle, we can do that on a European scale, but we need the transmission grid for this to happen, and we need as well to rely on these imports. No, I mean that was a big discussion as well in the Coal Commission. So, do we want to have hours where we are importing 10 gigawatt, for example, from abroad? No, or is that not acceptable? No, because we are exposed then to as well risks. No, that we are in these situations really allowed to use production capacities abroad. No, and of course the problem is going to increase substantially with the European decommissioning of capacities, that we are going to see not only happening in Germany but as well in these other countries. And I think at the moment we don't really have taken this fully into account. I guess the idea is that until 2030, we are going to handle it probably with some imports and some gas, but the really difficult next step from 2030 to 2050 is not well elaborated at the moment. Well, in the end, of course, we know that in order to build gas power plants, we only need 4 years, or whatever.
Yes.
No? So
Yes.
So this is probably not something that we have to solve today. But we have to solve it in 2025, or shortly afterwards. And so
yes, and the investment cost is not that high.
No, it's not that high.
You may have some dependence on Russia too with this solution.
Yeah, we have a lot of dependence on Russia, and we are, as you know, with Nord Stream 2, we are not exactly reducing it. So this is, of course, going to be a part. But I can as well tell you that, for example, we are now as well participating. Joachim, I mean, you're as well probably linked somehow on all this activity to building, green hydrogen globes and finding suitable new import or developing import strategies. New import strategies that might build now, for example, on green hydrogen. And this is something that is going to be pushed politically very much in the next year. So a lot of
I am working on the long-term strategy for Morocco, and Morocco plans to export a lot of green hydrogen to Germany. I don't know if it will work better than the Desertec project, but okay. So I start. Maybe other questions or remarks? Who wants to take the floor?
My name is Terenzio Facchinetti from Pulse of Europe. I have two questions. One, it is, probably didn't catch all the presentation because I joined a little bit later. The target, to my understanding, is to have net zero emission of greenhouse gases. And now we are talking about having gas to be one of a way to produce energy for the future. Did I miss something here? Because it seems to me a little bit a contradiction. This is the first question. And the second one, it is that the pictures that you show here is the one that comes from the European Union down to the German government, down from German government as an implementation as a global strategy for Germany. From the other side, I see the cities that are trying also to move forward and do something in terms of improving the climate. But I see a kind of a disconnection between what's coming from the German government and what is moving at the municipality level. Do you have this impression as well? Mm-hmm. And where do you see a potential of linking between the two?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so of course, I mean, net zero means net zero, and it as well means that the electricity sector will be probably the first sector to decarbonize. And the question, of course, is when will that happen? As I showed you here, with the current climate action plan in Germany, there would be still around, I mean, this target is 56% or 55%. By 2030, there is still carbon in the electricity generation, of course. No, this is partly coal, but it's mainly gas at that point in time. Now, if we are accelerating this, claim that coal is going to leave fully by 2030, and we did some calculations already, which shows that with coal going out by 2030, we actually have quite some free space as well for natural gas now in the sector, even under higher targets. No, so this is not in principle incompatible. No, you can because you're not. I mean, these are gas peakers. No, they are going to run only for hours. No, of course you need then renewables. You're investing. You have to invest strongly in renewables, but it's compatible with having as well natural gas in the system, which later on would have to be transformed. The question is a bit the path dependency. Now, do you really want to have, let's say, in the long run, the hydrogen in the electricity sector? No, or is it probably better now to try to decarbonize without this gas to hydrogen perspective? And that is something that is discussed, where people, of course, as well are bringing in all the infrastructure that we have, the gas infrastructure. So if you look, for example, on the hydrogen infrastructure plan in Germany, you can see that this is mainly building on existing natural gas infrastructure. And so the idea is that this is going to help decarbonize as well, you know, large parts of the economy which are difficult now to decarbonize otherwise. But it's I think it's an open question. I guess other people would say, you know, hydrogen is a very costly thing to do. Because we don't believe that, you know, Desertec 2 is actually happening. So we have to do it on our own. And then if we have to do it on our own, we cannot use the green electricity to power our electricity system. No, that makes no sense. But we have to bring this to other uses. Then the other question on the cities, well, I think it depends a bit if you are talking about, let's say, the visionary stage or the implementation stage. So if we talk about visions for cities in Germany, I think you're right, because, for example, the German government implemented the carbon neutrality target actually only recently, and only after a lot of pressure now from Europe, from different streams about the Paris Agreement. Before, the official position was always between 80 and 95%. Okay, so they were not really very ambitious early on. Okay, from a top-down perspective, and cities have already been pledging carbon neutrality in Germany much earlier than the government, and we have a lot of, you know, city networks, and the ministries are as well supporting cities now in developing their own planning for decarbonization early on. I'm in Münster, so Münster has a plan to be carbon neutral by 2035, for example. No, so this is more, I would say, the visionary phase. So cities were more visionary than the government, obviously. I think if you take us to implementation, the story might be different, because implementation is very often on a very local level, and we talked about transport sector. So mobility is extremely difficult to decarbonize, and that's really a problem of local communities and cities now, and it needs a lot of money. They have to rebuild fully this infrastructure, and I'm not sure whether they at the moment really have the means to make these changes. For sure they want to do it. I think they are committed, but that's then as well an issue that a lot of these things have to be implemented on the lowest level, where very often they simply don't have the financial means to do that. So they really depend on government, and at the moment I don't see this flow of support really going from the federal level to the municipalities.
Other question? Related to this point of local action, in France, thermal renovation of buildings is considered as a crucial issue in the transition, and we often look at what is happening in Germany to this respect. And recently, I have seen a report that indicated that, in spite of a very good financing system of the KfW, energy consumption in building has been stable since almost, I don't remember, 10 or 15 years. What do you think of this? I always consider that in France, probably we overstate the potential of energy consumption reduction in buildings. Not to say that we shouldn't do thermal retrofitting, not at all. We should do some, but maybe we should not expect too much from that. What do you think of this?
Yeah, well, I think you're exactly describing, let's say, what happened in Germany over the last decades. You can see that we have not achieved our energy efficiency goals. So we were not able to, let's say, substantially, for example, increase our renovation rates. Okay, we have some type of natural renovation that's probably 1% or 1.1% or something like that now, and we only made very small increases with a lot of. Many of these programs, as for the KfW programs, they were not very effective. They were giving a lot of money. Okay. So, for example, I get as well a KfW credit for my roof. But this is subsidization of things people would have done anyways. Because it's not really changing the investment calculus of house owners substantially, especially in times of low credit interest rates. So if you have the possibility to get everything financed by with an interest rate of 1% or whatever, or even below, then the benefits of many of these programs are relatively limited. So I think they have as well kind of overestimated the distribution that could come from efficiency measures. And that's a general characteristics, not only related to buildings. As part of the monitoring, we have looked at the carbon emission reduction coming from the National Action Plan on Energy Efficiency. 50 different measures. And, if you calculate the implemented carbon reduction, it's really devastating. In most of these measures, there are practically no measures that have more than 1 million ton. So it's achieving very little now in the time of low energy costs. So if you go to if you look at your heat, I just bought heating oil for my house, for another house, this is record low prices, heating oil prices in Germany. So you pay the same price as 10 years ago, but the same nominal price. So real prices have really fallen, and so all this regulation was not capable of really turning this thing. And if you go to because you talked about carbon neutrality, we just had a publication. How can we move to carbon neutrality? The renovation rate that was assumed in this scenario was 4%. Okay, and as I said, we achieved something like 1.2% with quite a lot of measures. Of course, you can reduce the building standards, but that will only work for new buildings, and with the existing ones, you're going to hit massive problems, politically. So I don't see how this is going to be realized. I think you have to find other possibilities.
This is one difficulty with very low demand scenarios. Yeah. Joachim, you have one foot in Germany and one foot in France. How do you understand this? This, I don't know if we can speak of a divide, but at least very contrasted visions, at least for some part of the French vision on the future of the solutions for the transition.
Yeah, well, let me first thank also Andreas to provide me such a great opportunity to get these deep insights and a nice comprehensive overview of what's happening in my country. So thanks again, Andreas. And from the outside perspective, I second pretty much everything. Your assessment, you're much deeper also into the political discussion. So I think that's interesting. Also interesting your assessment on the coal phase out, given your own analysis, and I guess most economists would agree, it would have been much cheaper to just use the market mechanisms and the prices we see today than paying billions of euros for the phase out in coal, which would have come anyway, highlighting the political economy of this, I guess. I also share the view about the role of nuclear. It's a political issue, and I'm not even talking about new nuclear where there may be a cost issue as well, but I guess there was no discussion of extending the lifetime of the existing nuclear power plants, which from an economic position may have made sense. I think today there's still six are still operating. They're supposed to be phased out within the next 2 years. So I think that's something that could have been thought about, but again, this is a very just highlighting the differences between the two countries when it comes to coal versus nuclear. This is a totally different perspective. It's much less talked about, and I think there was one comment about it in the chat also. I mean, in Germany, as Andreas put it, there's a high discussion about the nuclear risk and the lack of storage sites. We don't see that discussion in France. It's not as strong. And in Germany, this is independent of, except for one party, but it's independent of who is in power in Germany. I guess all the big parties share this view. So there's this is one of the differences across borders. And yeah, about energy efficiency, yes, getting from 1% renovation rate or 1.2% in Germany to 4% as the second wave kind of assumes. I think that's unrealistic. In Germany, in addition, we have a very different ownership structure, which should make it more difficult in Germany to get those rates, because it's less than 1 out of 2, or about 50% of the people actually own the dwelling they live in. I think in France it's more like 2/3, like 65% or so.
That's right.
So the landlord-tenant issue should be less of a problem, but still we don't see the high renovation rates either in France, and it's also, I think it's because of the economics. Prices tend to be higher. Higher in Germany. One of the things I benefited from moving, a few things are cheaper, wine, cheese, bread, and electricity. Mm-hmm. And if 1/3 of the heating of the residential heating is based on electricity, and that's very, very cheap, it just doesn't pay have these upfront costs for, or in many cases it doesn't pay. So these are some of the differences I could talk about. I observed. I don't know if Andreas, if you have time or not. You talked about the Dunkelflaute. At least it was in one of your slides. There's no wind and no sun, and the period is maybe about 2 weeks. I guess that could be covered with some type of storage systems, but maybe the larger problem is we tend to have a peak demand, or in France this may be even more the case when it comes to electricity. So how about storing electricity over longer periods? Is there anything in the German energy transition or in the restructuring plan that we should be aware of, or that you could share with us?
No, I guess of course the development of long-term storage is in Germany closely linked to hydrogen. No? So this is really really the topic now that is brought forward there. On the other hand, there is, if we talk more about short-term, in general storage, not for the Dunkelflaute, but storage, I think now there's a lot on batteries. So a lot of money from the recovery packages is going on battery research. You know that Tesla built a super factory, gigafactory, is going to build a gigafactory in Berlin, or close to Berlin, so that give a big push. My university got 500 million for a research battery factory. So the German government is as well investing a lot in research on batteries. Of course, the German car manufacturers have more or less ignored the topic for a long time, but they want to pick this up quickly now, and as you know, for example, Volkswagen has the biggest research budget now in Germany, 14 billion per year, and they're investing now a lot on their battery technologies. So this is going. I think this is going to change quickly as well.
But these are mobile batteries.
Yeah.
How to store large quantities for a long time? Do you think batteries are a good solution for the grid?
Well, they are part of the solution as well for the grid.
Yes, but for shorter times.
But for shorter times, no.
Yes.
But that will be as well important. And then, of course, there are a lot of regulatory problems at the moment because with the surge in PV, indeed also the transmission system operators they want to build much more batteries to optimize their grid investments. At the moment there are a lot of regulatory problems with that. So making the system more efficient, but for the longer term storage, I really don't see another solution than the hydrogen that we discussed.
Yes. If I may, we are nearing the end of our webinar. I have one last question, maybe. Are there in Germany studies on the area land requirement of a fully renewable energy scenario? What would be the consequences in terms of land requirements?
Yeah, there are some studies, for example, for different scenario build-outs, and even institutes like Öko Institute, which is one of the, I think, prime institutes next to EC, of course, Joachim, was delivering support to policymakers. They don't think that space, if you take into account natural reserves, differences to buildings, minimum distances, etc. They think that this will be a problem reaching the 100% scenarios. Of course, I mean, as I said, at the moment, it's really the availability of space now that's hindering the renewable build out in Germany. And of course you can say, well, we are going to remove some restrictions. For example, we have these minimum distance laws in Bavaria, 1.5 kilometers from the next settlement. In North Rhine-Westphalia, 1 kilometer. If you are removing that, you're generating more space, which would allow faster penetration. But these fully 100% renewable scenarios, I think even these more ecologically inspired research institutions, they are very skeptical that this is going to be realized.
So this is by ECO. So I will have a look at this.
This is by ECO, and ECO says, I think it says 3% or 2.5% or something like that. Well, given all these restrictions I just said, they think it's probably not going to happen.
Okay. So it's about 8 o'clock. Thank you very much, Andreas. Thank you very much for the giving us part of your time. I know you're very, very busy. And well, thank you for all the attendees to this webinar. Maybe we may have further opportunities to exchange. Yeah. And I think that in any case, in our perspective, Grenoble Europe Énergie, it's very important to improve the understanding of the fundamentals of the energy transition in both countries. So I hope certainly we have made a small step today, but a step in any way. Michel, do you want to say something?
No, that's completely okay. Thank you again, Andreas. And I do hope that we will continue our discussion in the future.
Yes, I indeed hope that we continue, hopefully not via Zoom, even though I learned yesterday that the next Tour de France is not going to pass through Vercors and Grenoble. It's
so you are. I know you are a cycling fan, indeed, Andreas.
Yeah.
So
watching cycling. Yeah. No, but of course, let's keep in contact. I would be really happy.
Okay.
Okay.
So thank you very much to all. Take care and see you soon.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Bye.